Hello, anatomy friends. I'm going to do a couple things in this video. The first is to go over the answers in your workbook for the pages that I assigned you last week, just to make sure that you've got all the correct answers before you start labeling our friend. Woohoo! All right, that way you can stop and go back where you need to and rewind. So I'm on page 23. That's the first page. It looks like this. And I'm going to have you, as we go through, these are the ones that you're going to want to label on your mannequin. And because you've already put numbers 1 through 30 something on your skull, 20 something on your skull, we're going to go ahead and put the abbreviation AX for axial skeleton in front of the numbers to label. So for example, on page 23 here, number 1, cervical vertebra. And so the answer there is cervical. So number 1 that you're going to label on this guy, you're going to figure out where the cervical vertebrae are. And you're not going to label them just number 1. You're going to label any of them. Excuse me. Still fighting COVID. That's why it's hard for me to talk and Zoom and do all that fanciness. So you're going to label that AX1, axial skeleton number 1. Can you see that on there? I labeled one of the cervical vertebra AX1. So that's how you're going to label these guys, is with the AX in front of it, so that you know that's part of the axial skeleton, which makes up your skull, your spinal vertebra, your ribs, your sternum, clavicle, scapula, and then your pelvic girdle, which we're going to talk about later. Okay? So on page 23, number 1, AX1 is cervical, AX2 is thoracic, AX3 is lumbar, AX4 is sacral, and AX5 is coccyx. If you want to know how to spell those, look those dudes up or see me during office hours and I'll spell them out for you. But I'm just going through and grading so you can go through and grade what you've got there. On the next page, so page 24, you got the examples of vertebrae there. They've got different names to the different parts to them. And number 1 is the body of the vertebra. Number 6 is the lamina. 5 is the pedicle. 2 is the spinous process. 3 is the transverse process. And 4 is the vertebral foramen. And so on each one of these, number 1 is going to be the body right here, the body, and the body. So number 1 is the same for all 3 of those, whether you're in the cervical vertebral region, the thoracic vertebral region, or the lumbar region. So what you'll notice right away with your vertebrae is because of where they're located in the body, they have a specific shape because they do a different job based on where they are. Obviously, your cervical means your neck vertebrae, so they have to do a lot of rotating and twisting. Your thoracic vertebrae, you've got 12 of those, so 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, and your thoracic vertebrae are attached to your ribs, and then also to the ribs posteriorly. Your lumbar vertebrae are not attached to anything, but they are what's holding your body upright and straight for the most part. That's your lower back, and those are usually the ones that get injured. So if you know somebody who has a bulging or herniated disc, it's usually going to be in your lumbar vertebrae because of the nice curve in the spine there, and that tends to be a weak point for injury. Then your sacral vertebrae, you have 5 of those, and they're fused together, and then you have little coccyx there at the end. You have 4 coxal vertebrae. So you have 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 4 coxal vertebrae. So now I'm on page 25 here. We'll talk about the 2 special cervical vertebrae, number 1 and number 2, that allow you to rotate your head in just a second. But let's finish looking at page 25. Number 1 is the sacral foramen anterior. 2 is the sacrum. 3 is the coccyx. 4 is the sacral canal. 5 is the median sacral crest. 6 is the sacral foramen posterior. And 7 is the sacral hiatus. Number 8, there are 33 total vertebrae. Number 9, there are 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, also 5 sacral, and 4 coxal vertebrae. Number 10, the lumbar vertebrae have the largest, strongest bodies. They're the thickest. And the first cervical vertebra has its name of the atlas. And it's called that because if you look at the shape of it, it's got divots where the skull sits on there. And the occipital condyle, if you remember that from our skull anatomy, the occipital condyle sits down into 2 spaces on the atlas. And it's called the axis or the atlas because Atlas carried the world on his shoulders. And the atlas vertebra is actually what your skull sits on. It sits on that first cervical vertebra called your atlas. And then the axis, so here's your atlas. And then this is kind of, a little weird, but your axis fits up through there. There's a part called the dens, D-E-N-S, that fits through the cervical vertebra number 1 and allows your head to rotate back and forth. So the reason why we can do this is because we have an atlas that our skull sits on, and then C2, or cervical vertebra number 2, is the axis, and that has the odontoid process. The odontoid process is what sits up through the atlas and allows your head, your neck to rotate like that. So when you have a cervical neck vertebral break, the higher up it is, then the more likely you are to be a quadriplegic. That means both arms and both legs. So if you are having a neck or spine injury that's lower down, like say in your thoracic vertebral region, that's when you're paralyzed, a paraplegic. Paraplegic is your 2 legs are paralyzed. So way up high, injuries right up here in your cervical area, they typically lead to quadriplegia. So you cannot move any of your 4 limbs. Typically, if you break your number 1, your atlas, or number 2, your axis, that's usually kind of a death sentence because that high up leads to damage that takes messages to your heart and lungs from your brain. And so usually if you have that real high neck breakage right there, like Christopher Reeve, Superman, broke his C2. He actually broke the odontoid process that fits up through the atlas. So he broke his C2 odontoid process riding his horse. And usually that is a death sentence, but he survived for quite a while. He actually died of pneumonia related to the fact that he couldn't breathe on his own anymore. Everything had to be done for him. I think I told you a little bit about Christopher Reeve before. But anyway, so he broke his odontoid process on his axis, so his C2 vertebra. All right, on to page 26 here. 26, number 12 is axis and rotate. 13 is posterior. 14 is spinal cord. 15 is vertebral arch. 16 is thoracic vertebrae. And 17 is 5. All right, now we're going to do some more labeling. All right, so anything that you're marking with an AX, that means that's something you're going to want to label on this guy right here. So now we're going to move on to page 27. That's this one right here. And on page 27, we're going to label, go ahead and write AX in front of number 18. So AX 18 right there. AX 18 is your clavicle. AX 19 is your sternum. AX 20 is your costal cartilage. We're not going to label 21, but it's thoracic vertebra. AX 22, you're going to label that the manubrium of the sternum, that's the top part. AX 23 is the body of the sternum. And AX 24 is the xiphoid process of the sternum. If you've taken CPR, they teach you to find the xiphoid process. That is the tip of the sternum. And you want to go above that when you're doing chest compressions. Because if you compress on that little tiny tip of the xiphoid process of the sternum, you could actually boink it into the chest cavity and have it penetrate the heart. So they are saying to go ahead and go 2 fingers above the xiphoid process to do your chest compressions so that you're not breaking that xiphoid process off and damaging the person more. All right, 25 is the manubrium 26 is costal cartilage. We're on page 28 now. So 28 is, 27 on page 28. Rib pairs 1 through 7 are called true ribs because they attach directly to the sternum via costal cartilage. So if you look at your maniken, these ribs right here, they attach directly to the sternum with costal cartilage. And then question number 28, rib pairs 8 through 12 are called false ribs because down here they do not connect directly to the sternum, but they still have costal cartilage connected to them. And so they connect to the costal cartilage and then to the costal cartilage here and then to the sternum. And then number 29, rib pairs 11 through 12 are called floating ribs. And if you can see on your little guy here, they're called floating ribs because they are not attached at all anteriorly. So they're not attached to anything in the front, they're just attached posteriorly. And so they're called floating ribs because they're not attached to anything in the front. All right, next we're moving on to page 30. That's this one right here. So page 30, we're looking at our scapula right here. You're going to label some parts to your scapula. That's this back shoulder blade right here. So on page 30, we're going to do AXS, right? Because we got a number 1 here again. So we're going to do AXS because that means axial skeleton scapula. Number 1 is the coracoid process. AX number 2 is the acromion of the scapula. AXS3 is the spine of the scapula. We're not going to label number 4, which is the head of the scapula. Number 5 is the glenoid cavity. 6 is the acromion. And 7 is acromion, spine, and coracoid process. So pause, rewind if you need to go over any of these again, because hopefully you already got these turned in. I'm looking at those right now as we speak on the Sunday night. See what you guys did. So you're only labeling AXS1 on page 30, AXS2 on page 30, and AXS3 on page 30. That's going to help you number these so you can go back through and review them and study them. All right, flipping to page 37, you got this in your pelvis right here. So on page 38, we're going to do some more labeling, and we're going to label these AXP for axial skeleton pelvis. Number 1, you are not going to label because you've already labeled it as the sacrum. So on page 38, number 1 is sacrum. Number AXP2 is the pubis. AXP3 is the obturator foramen, so that's the hole. You're going to want to draw an arrow. And we're going to do a zoom at the end of the week so I can show you where that is. But it's the little hole right there. It's in the front right here, anteriorly. That's your obturator foramen. It's not an actual hole on your manikin, so you're just going to draw an arrow there pointing to that little guy right there, and we'll go over it together on Zoom on Friday. Hopefully I'll have a little bit more breath in me by that time. All right, so AXP number 3 is the obturator foramen. AXP4 on page 38 is the iliac crest. AXP5 is the ilium. AXP6, draw an arrow, that's the pubic symphysis. So that's here in the front. It's where the 2 pubic bones come together. That is the pubic symphysis. So you're going to draw an arrow to that. Pubic symphysis, AXP6. AXP7 is the ischium. Number 8, we are not labeling, but it is the iliac crest, the posterior view. AXP9 is the posterior iliac spine. We're not labeling number 10, but it is the acetabulum. It is where it's that, you can't see it on your manikin, and that's why we're not having it. I'm not having you label it, but it is where the head of your femur fits into your pelvis. And then AXP11 is your ischial spine, and AXP12 is the ischial tuberosity. Those are your butt bones. You sit on your ischium, your ischial tuberosities. All right, so just so that you know, this is how I labeled mine. AXP, there you go. So you can label your book the same and go ahead and label those on your mannequin. If you've got questions, I got office hours 3 to 4 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and I put a Zoom link on there for you. So you can pop in and ask me questions, or wait till Friday and we'll do a quick all-class Zoom just to answer any questions for you on labeling. On page 38, number 13 is coxa. 14 is the ilium. 15 is the pubic symphysis. 16 is the ischium. 17 is the acetabulum. 18 on page 39 is the iliac crest. 19 is the obturator foramen. And 20 is the ischium. And that is it for your axial skeleton. So axial skeleton is skull. It's your vertebral column. It's your clavicles. It's your scapulae. It's your ribs. It's your sternum. And then it is all your pelvic bones. It's called your axial skeleton. We're going to learn these parts, and then we'll go to the appendicular skeleton, and that's where you get to learn all names of the hand, the wrist bones in here, and your radius and ulna, and your humerus, and all that kind of stuff. That's a little bit later, but your axial skeleton is down your axis, the center of your body. So we're going to label that this week. And again, if you got any questions, pop into my office hours, and then go ahead and attempt to label your skeleton with just the ones that I had, like the AX1 or the AXP or the AXS. See if you can find those on here. Excuse me, give me a shout. If you got any questions via email or using my office hours, 3 to 4, Monday through Thursday. Or we'll wait until Friday and we'll kind of go through it together as a class, what you should have labeled. So be thinking, guys, also, if we get an extension of our stay at home from the governor or from the school. So if we go past this week with the distance learning, I might have you, or I will have you, drive by the school again so I can give you some clay. We've got different colored clay. We're going to be using brown clay for your muscles. So if we're going to go past just the bones here, which would probably be the end of next week, we'd start the muscle system. We still have to do the appendicular skeleton, but I just wanted you to be prepared and be thinking about that. So sometime before Christmas, we'll start the muscular system, and you're going to need some clay and some tools for that. So be thinking if you want to come and pick that up at the school. We'll talk about it when we do our class Zooms later on in the week on Friday, or even next week we can talk about it, because we won't know if we're going to be extended until probably either Friday or the weekend. It'll be determined on, the number of cases and things like that. So check out our resources I put on here for you. Stop and pause this video. Let me know if you've got any questions. And I'm going to be updating grades like crazy for the next couple of hours. So if you've got any questions about grades, give me a shout on that too. See you later.